I'm Pat Torres. Welcome to The Story and welcome to Friday. What a beautiful day out there today. A great day to enjoy the great outdoors. And tonight we're going to start with a story concerning the outdoors, the environment, specifically climate anxiety. What's that mean anyway? And are people making big life decisions because of it? That, my friends, is our big story. Earlier this year, we brought you a story about climate anxiety and asked you to fill out an online survey to tell us how you feel about our warming planet. Is it something that you worry about often, or does it affect your daily life? Maybe not, maybe so. What about big decisions like having children? And does the future of our climate give you pause? Well, the results are in from our survey. Environmental reporter Cale Williams joins us with some analysis as well as a reaction from a local expert on what it all means.
So before we get into your responses, a couple items of housekeeping. We want to be clear, this was not a scientific poll. We put this out for any of our viewers to tell us how climate change is affecting their mental health and how they make important decisions in their lives. We got more than 70 responses, with about 55% of respondents being over the age of 45. Roughly 60% identified as female and about 83% were white, which is pretty close to the statewide average. But even though this wasn't a representative sample of Oregon's population, I still think these results are valuable. So first, we wanted to establish a bit of a baseline. So we asked you, how important is the issue of global warming to you personally? 62.5% of you said that it was extremely important. And you know, that's not that surprising given the last few years of wildfires and heat waves. The other end of the spectrum, 2.7% of you said that it was not at all important. You know, that's your prerogative. But we wanted to know just how important, how worried these types of things made you. So we asked, how worried are you about global warming? 55.6% said they were extremely worried. Another 29.2% said they were very worried. Altogether, that's about 86% who are either extremely or very worried, almost 9 in 10 people. And they have good reason to be. Despite all that Oregon has done, incentives for electric vehicles, rebates for heat pumps, caps on carbon dioxide emissions, our state is still well behind where we need to be to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. A recent report from the Oregon Global Warming Commission found that in 2021, the state was nearly 20% off the goal set for the year before. And that brings us to the next question in our survey. We asked, over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by feeling down, depressed, or hopeless because of global warming? Almost 43% of you said not at all. However, another 40% said this kind of mental strain was happening several days out of every 2 weeks. Another 11% said it was happening more than half the time. About 7% said they felt like this nearly every day. And these feelings are having profound impacts on people's behavior. We asked, if this applies to your life, does climate change affect your decision to have children? Now, this question wasn't quite as relevant to some of our older respondents, but the results are still informative. 36% said no, but another third of the group said that changes in our climate have made them think twice about one of the most important decisions a person can make. So we wanted to hear more from these people in their own words, and they told us. One person said, I chose not to have kids partly because what world would be left for them? I couldn't in good conscience create life in this environment. Another person told us, the future will still need people in it, working to better humanity. I'm just remorseful of the struggle and watching things fall apart while we raise our daughter. Let's hear one more. My spouse and I did talk about climate change when we discussed whether or not we wanted to have kids. Ultimately, we decided that climate change isn't enough to deter us from having children, and now we have 2. So I reached out to Yanni Ma. She's an environmental communications expert at Oregon State to help me make sense of some of these answers. She said some of these responses were striking.
I'm a little bit surprised that I see the more people concerned or worried about climate change, it actually impacts how they will think about whether or not they are going to have a child in the future. Because if they think, or if they feel hopeless, they think there is no future, they are less likely to have a child in the future.
And there was one question that really got at the heart of why the future seems so daunting. How much do you think global warming will harm future generations of people? 86.1% of you said a great deal. That's almost 9 in 10 people who think that climate change will harm future generations, our kids and grandkids, a great deal. So the big takeaway from all this, climate change is a significant source of stress for a whole range of people. And this would be troubling in any state, but it's particularly bad in Oregon. We're consistently ranked as one of the worst states for mental health, both in prevalence of mental illness and access to care. But that doesn't mean there's nothing that can be done. Ma did some correlation analysis on these answers about where people get information about the environment. She found people were far more likely to care about climate change when they hear about it from friends and family, rather than from people like me on television.
So we do suggest if you and your friends or family members can talk more about climate change, it may impact other people's opinion on it. And further, maybe more people would be more likely to engage in this issue.
Ma said getting involved in advocacy can provide some relief. And another easy strategy to help combat climate anxiety is to get out into nature. After all, what better way to ease your anxiety about the state of the environment than to get out and experience the beauty of it? There are also mental health resources, websites, and 24-hour hotlines available to anyone who needs them. We've got a full rundown of those resources up right now on kgw.com.
Thanks, Cale. What great information. Hey, if you missed out on our survey earlier this year, we'd still love to hear from you right now, in fact. Do you think you have climate anxiety? Why or why not? Send us an email, will you? The address is thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090. We have a follow-up tonight on a story involving Oregon's elections division and a $500,000 donation that the Democratic Party of Oregon got during campaign season last fall. The elections division wants the state Justice Department to investigate and consider bringing criminal charges against the man who gave the money, but not against the Democratic Party of Oregon. We care because, as Governor Kotek said earlier this week, public trust is not exactly high at the moment when it comes to the Secretary of State's office, which oversees elections. It's also worth noting the Director of Elections is the former Deputy Director for the Democratic Party of Oregon. So yes, we are watching closely to see how issues with the party are handled. Now, here's some quick background. This is tied to the collapse of the cryptocurrency exchange FTX. It was one of the biggest exchanges in the world, but now its founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, is charged with fraud by federal prosecutors. He's pled not guilty, by the way. When FTX was flying high, it was sending lots of money to politicians and political groups all around the country. Now prosecutors say that money belonged to FTX clients. When the $500,000 arrived at the Democratic Party of Oregon, the money was listed as coming from a company called Prime Trust. Tuesday, we pointed you to this article in the Oregonian by Hillary Borud, which highlighted the donation. After the paper began asking questions, the Democratic Party corrected the source of the donation and listed it instead as coming from Nishad Singh. In the earlier edition of their story, the paper stated that the Democratic Party knowingly filed a false report about the source of the donation. The paper has since clarified that, updating the article today and stating that the Democratic Party strongly disputes that conclusion, but adding, in fact, the party had information that indicated Singh was the donor, and the Oregonian, Oregon Live, does not intend to imply anything more. That's what they wrote. It led the elections division to issuing a $35,000 fine against the Oregon Democratic Party. Then, the night before a hearing on the issue, the division slashed the fine to $15,000. And now Elections is asking the Oregon Department of Justice to investigate Nishad Singh and bring criminal charges against him if they're warranted. As for the Democratic Party of Oregon, well, a statement from the Elections Division within the Secretary of State's office reads, the investigation did not find clear evidence that the Democratic Party of Oregon knew the true donor when they reported the contributions last year. Instead, the investigation determined that the party could have taken more care with its compliance. As part of the settlement with the Democratic Party, the party is now being tasked with publicly sharing the steps they're taking to prevent this from happening again, along with that reduced fine of $15,000. If they don't fully comply, that fine could rise back up to $50,000. And the Secretary of State's office says if new information about Singh's donation comes to light, the investigation into the party can be reopened.
Up next on The Story, a school board shakeup. We've been following the Newburgh School Board for years, following a ban on political symbols like the pride flag and the legal battles that followed. But following Tuesday's election, Newburgh residents showed they are ready for change. Out of a 7-member board, there are now 5 new board members, each backed by the same political action group.
We wanted to insert some critical thinking, some common sense, seeing things a little differently than, the experience we'd had so far on the school board.
As well as the ousted board chair.
I'm hoping we did the tough stuff.
When The Story returns.
Welcome back. Let's talk about this year's school board elections. They're supposed to be nonpartisan, right? But as we've seen over the last few years, in some districts, that's not really the case. That's especially true in the Newburgh School District. We followed the 7-member board for a while now, ever since the majority of their school board members who lean conservative implemented a ban on political symbols in schools. That started with a ban on Black Lives Matter and pride flags. The ban was ultimately ruled unconstitutional, but not before it set off 2 years of political battles in Newburgh. The board fired the superintendent and replaced him with their own. There were protests and lawsuits and a recall election that failed. Then the board's 3 more liberal members quit. They were replaced by 3 new conservatives. This week, 5 of the 7 seats on the Newburgh School Board were up for grabs, and the voters made a big change. They elected 5 new members, each of them backed by the Oregon Cares PAC. That group was formed in opposition to the conservative board, but they told us they weren't really trying to get liberal candidates elected, that they just wanted to get away from the extremism they'd seen from the board over the past 2 years.
You know, these are just normal people that have very deep ties to the Newburgh community. Every single one of them has had or will have students in the district. So they all have skin in the game or had skin in the game in some way. They all have a big heart for the local community and for the success of our schools. They are very diverse in terms of political affiliation. And, you know, we are somewhat agnostic when it comes to that. We wanted to insert some critical thinking, some common sense, you know, seeing things a little differently than, you know, the experience we'd had so far on the school board.
One of the people elected is James Wolfer. He beat out the board chair, Dave Brown, who was one of the champions of the political symbols ban. Wolfer says he decided to run for the board after seeing how the controversies were affecting people in Newburgh.
You know, all my siblings are part of the LGBTQ community, and they moved as far away as they could from Newburgh, and their decision felt more solidified the more that we saw what was going on here. And then just, you know, being a parent myself really started making me frustrated when I saw not only what those policies were doing to the community, but also just really seeing the finances in jeopardy, where our legal bills went. I don't have all the figures in front of me, but, you know, our legal budget went from like $2,000 a year just a couple years ago to, you know, $300,000 a year. So, you know, just really seeing that, especially for a community that's a little bit more rural, you know, we don't have the money to just throw around like that.
That is a lot of money. We also talked to Brown. He initially survived a recall attempt on his seat last year, but then was voted out this week. He says despite the controversies, he stands by what the conservative-leaning board did.
I'm hoping we did the tough stuff. We got rid of a very weak superintendent who had an agenda a mile long. That was really hard. I liked him. A lot of people say, well, we've lost a lot of staff. We lost a lot of staff that needed to go. And we did lose some good staff. Schools across this country have lost students and staff. They tried to say that was, you know, just Newburgh. It's not. It's everywhere. So, you know, I don't know. I think, you know, that's a really good question, but I think some people have to do the tough stuff.
He says the job of being a school board member is tough, and it's gotten a lot more heated over the last few years. And he's not sure the new board can fix that.
But we're a pretty selfish country right now, and I'd say all of us. You know, we're pretty selfish. And I say when they say normal, good luck with that, because right now it's kind of out of your control. I will say my experience, what I would say the progressives have done to me. My life's been threatened. My wife's been harassed at school unmercifully. My friends, my boys, our house has been vandalized. I've had death threats on the phone. I had to get a different phone.
The new school board takes their seats in July. The 2 members who were not up for election lean conservative. Their terms are not up for another 2 years. Up next on The Story, part 2 of our series looking at teacher burnout. Yesterday, we heard from teachers across the country who are fed up with the low pay and increased workload, hanging on to their careers by a thread. So what's being done to drive people toward the teaching profession? The details when The Story returns.
Straight ahead at 6:30, a semi-truck driver now behind bars after allegedly driving drunk, causing a crash that killed 7 people on I-5. What we learned from his first court appearance. Also ahead, eye in the sky, how a drone is now searching for the source of what sparked a massive building fire. Plus, teaming up to keep folks safe on our rivers. The new tools first responders hope they never have to use. That's next at 6:30. Hope to see you then.
Last night, our Verify team took you inside classrooms around the country to hear from teachers who say they're burned out and fed up. Tonight on part 2 of our Verify special, the team looks at what is being done to get more teachers into the classroom.
A crisis is growing in America's K-12 schools.
We're losing teachers faster than we can get new ones in.
According to the data from the National Center for Education Statistics, the percent of college grads earning a bachelor's degree in education is roughly half of what it was in 1970, dropping from more than 170,000 to less than 90,000 in 2019. Coupled with high rates of early retirement and stress-induced career changes, the teacher pool is drying up.
I mean, it's a crisis, in my opinion. It's not going to get better without taking some intentional steps to make it better.
So who's going to teach America's children? That question has school districts, lawmakers, universities, and educational organizations scrambling to find answers before it's too late. One strategy, at least at the state level, has been
lowering standards and lowering requirements for entry into teaching.
That's Heather Pesky, president of the National Council on Teacher Quality. In addition to having a bachelor's degree, most states used to require teachers to pass a teaching certification exam before being allowed to teach. But since 2020, Pesky says at least 12 states have removed or lowered the requirements for teachers to get that certification. Meaning in places like Alabama and Missouri, even if teaching candidates don't pass the state exam, they could still be given a license to teach. A change that Tanya Chestnut, a board member for Alabama State Board of Education, justified by saying, "When you're in a crisis, you tend to do things you probably would not ordinarily do. I think this will definitely bring some relief without compromising the quality of education." High school English teacher Violeta Duran and middle school instructional coach Evan Shin aren't as optimistic. They worry lowering standards will result in students getting an underqualified teacher.
I think there is a danger in that.
We are just putting people in classrooms that are not credentialed or who are not ready to be in the classroom. But because of the fact that we're looking for a warm body, we are saying like, oh, okay, well, good enough.
But Pesky says it's not enough.
This will result in a less effective teacher workforce. And that's the opposite of what our students need, particularly now on the heels of this pandemic.
University of Pennsylvania professor Richard Ingersoll has studied teachers and their working conditions for more than 20 years. He says these desperate measures of lowering standards to teach will only make more teachers leave the profession.
Generally, the less prepared people, the emergency and temporary licenses, for instance, that are issued, those people quit at higher rates.
His research already showed that nearly half of teachers with proper training leave the profession within the first 5 years. Nonprofit organizations are also scrambling to find solutions to the teacher shortage crisis. Transcend is a nonprofit that works with schools to test innovative ways to help teachers enter and stay in the profession. They say they've seen success elevating people from non-teaching roles, like coaches and parents, into teaching roles for the short term to ease the burden on existing teachers. Steve Carlin, a former superintendent in the rural Garden City School District in southwest Kansas, had a similar idea 15 years ago. Back then, Carlin says his open teaching positions were mostly in high school math and science classes. To fill those roles, he'd take elementary school teacher candidates that he didn't have classrooms for and pay for their training and then put them in those high school classrooms. And that worked until 2016. But then the teaching shortages became so problematic that
we haven't been able to utilize that strategy because we can't even fill all of our elementary classrooms.
So Carlin dipped into his pool of substitute teachers to fill those roles. But now
the pool is completely dry.
While schools are trying to find ways to fill their vacancies, the federal government is trying to address teacher shortages with money.
Let's give public school teachers a raise.
2 proposals in Congress aim to do just that. The Pay Teachers Act, introduced by Senator Bernie Sanders in March, and the American Teacher Act, introduced by Representative Frederica Wilson in the House in February. If passed, they would set a minimum starting salary of $60,000 for all U.S. public school teachers, a big jump from the national average starting salary of $41,770 in the 2020 to 2021 school year. Neither bill has been voted on, but bipartisan support for both is growing. As of April 2023, the Senate bill is backed by 7 co-sponsors and has the support of more than 50 major education organizations, while the House bill has more than 50 co-sponsors. There's also money for teachers baked into legislation passed during the pandemic. In March 2021, the American Rescue Plan Act allocated $130 billion to K-12 schools. The White House says schools can use that money to invest in teacher pipeline programs, increase teacher salaries, and hire more teachers. The U.S. Departments of Education and Labor issued a joint statement to state lawmakers and administrators, urging them to use this relief money to specifically increase pay for teachers. But Duran says that isn't happening at her school. She says schools are hesitant to spend the money on long-term investments because they worry the aid will eventually run out, leaving schools with salaries they can't afford to pay. But money doesn't have to come from the federal government or go to the schools directly. The University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Education is using private funding from alumni and supporters to incentivize more people to become teachers.
We're saying to any student who wants to come into any of our 15 different teacher education programs that we will pay the cost of their tuition, their testing fees, and their licensing fees.
She says in exchange, the students must pledge to teach in Wisconsin public schools for 3 to 4 years. The $25 million privately funded program, launched in August of 2020, also offers mentorship and professional development support for alums. Support from a program that former teacher Sarah Coys wishes she had during the early years of her teaching.
I think there's a lot of support for first-year teachers. And I think people think, oh, after your second or third year, you're good to go, you're a pro. But I think that those supports need to stay in place.
Duran, who teaches in Southern California, says she'd like to see Wisconsin's Pledge program be adopted by more schools.
I see it as a positive, like any program that can do that. I mean, it would be great if, UCLA could do that or USC.
So what do current teachers think will help inspire others to join this career path? For a long time, high school teacher Joaquin Rodriguez says passion alone was what sparked that interest. But now,
when you have that burnout and that fatigue, that passion piece is the first thing to go.
Educators like Rodriguez, Shin, and Duran say they're still hanging on. And when they ask themselves why they're still doing this,
at the end of the day, it's the students. There's an energy that they bring that is unmatched. Even just showing care and concern from students sometimes, that is enough to kind of be like, okay, we're going to be okay.
Teachers, you're so incredible. Thanks for what you do. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. And remember, the story, our collective story, that never ends. Stick around now for the news at 6:30, and after that, enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you right back here on Monday.